You're watching Satluj TV News. I'm Angus Scott in London. The White House has blasted an online campaign by Indian activists after a recent presidential press conference with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Towards the end of the Prime Minister's visit to the US, a joint press conference was held between Modi and President Joe Biden, attended by the world's press. In one of the first questions posed, Wall Street Journal reporter Sabrina Siddiqui quizzed the Indian Prime Minister directly about his questionable human rights record against minorities in India.
India has long prided itself as the world's largest democracy, but there are many human rights groups who say that your government has discriminated against religious minorities and sought to silence its critics. As you stand here in the east room of the White House, where so many world leaders have made commitments to protecting democracy, what steps are you and your government willing to take to improve the rights of Muslims and other minorities in your country and to uphold free speech?
Modi, who rarely takes questions from reporters, said at the time that he was surprised by the question and delivered a firm response of his democratic credentials. However, shortly after the press conference, Sabrina Siddiqui became the subject of a vicious online campaign by pro-Hindutva social media users. The politically motivated campaign against the journalist was so unusual for any normal democratic state to experience that it prompted National Security Council spokesman John Kirby to warn India that it was completely unacceptable and antithetical to the very principles of democracy that were on display last week during the state visit. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre later added that the US was committed to the freedom of the press and condemned any efforts of intimidation or harassment of a journalist. The intervention by the White House will come as an embarrassment to Narendra Modi, who has been very keen to portray his democratic qualifications on the world stage, often stating he remains the leader of the world's largest democracy, as he courts leaders of the G7 nations. But evidence has mounted over recent years of his government's poor treatment of minorities in India, including Sikh and Muslim communities, provoking several human rights organisations to criticise his governance and call into question his democratic credentials. As a free press remains an essential element in any healthy democracy, India has had the recent ignominy of falling to 161st out of 180 countries in the World Free Press Index, 11 places behind Pakistan. Worse still, the recent killings of Sikh activists in various countries have aroused suspicions amongst several communities that India's intelligence services are now running clandestine assassination operations internationally, eliminating any political activist seen as a threat to Modi's government. In another embarrassing development in recent days, former Canadian Security Intelligence Service operator Dan Stanton admitted that his government had been aware of Indian state interference within Canada for years and had been conducting campaigns deliberately maligning the large Sikh community in the country. This only confirmed widely held suspicions globally that Indian intelligence services have been operating for years to covertly silence any critics of the Hindu-majority government in India. Whilst world leaders are currently lining up to welcome Narendra Modi and India as allies in the geopolitical dance to contain an increasingly belligerent China, Modi's Achilles heel in any negotiations will continue to be questions surrounding his treatment of minorities domestically, and operations being conducted on foreign soil clearly designed to silence any political criticism. Both issues which are seen as deeply incompatible with a modern democratic country. You've been watching Satluj TV News, and you can find more stories in detail on our channel, that's Satnet News, so it's worth clicking on that subscribe button to make sure you get to see stories as they're broadcast. And don't forget, if you have any comments or indeed any opinions on any of our news stories, you can comment below or actually drop us a direct message at message@satlujtv.com. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. For Satluj TV News, I'm Angus Scott in London.